I would like to introduce the moderator of our next panel. It's Swati Ghosh, who would like to come up and introduce her panel that is on policy opportunities emerging from automation and digitalization. So, Swati, come on.
Thank you all. Thank you, OECD, for the invitation to be here today. My name is Swati Ghosh. I'm the Senior Director of Research at IEDC, the International Economic Development Council. And our panel here talks about local opportunities, policy opportunities that are emerging from automation and digitalization. So we have 4 panelists here, and we thought that we will start off with just introducing the 4 panelists, and then I will pose questions to them, and then we can go with our discussion. So our first panelist is Liz Wilkie. She's the Tech Policy and Future of Work Researcher at LinkedIn. Jaime Cruz, the Executive Director of Workforce Connections at Las Vegas. Laura Ripani, Lead Specialist for Labor Markets and Social Security Division at the Inter-American Development Bank, and Jeffrey Brown, Manager of Future of Work and Artificial Intelligence at the Bertelsmann Foundation in North America. So thank you all for joining us today. And our first question is for Liz. In your work at LinkedIn, how do you see that jobs are changing? What are the skills that are most required to get people hired in today's labor market?
Does that work? Yep. All right. No. Hi. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Swati, for the great introductory question. So we have been tracking at LinkedIn the evolution of jobs and skills for quite some time, in particularly very intensively since 2012 and then again in 2015 when we redesigned the site. So we have access that's sort of unprecedented to, at a very granular level, we have 35,000 standardized skills that are all filed according to 15,000 standardized occupations, which is far more granular than I think anybody has really ever been able to do before. And what we're seeing by being able to surface the most unique or characteristic skills of all of these occupations are a couple of things. That there is a proliferation in human-centric jobs that either are directly responsible for face-to-face interacting and understanding. So examples of these would be community managers and content managers who are actually regulating the content and the quality of human discussion and facilitating that. Or customer success managers have replaced a lot of sales positions where the job is actually not to sell a product, but to ensure that that customers understand the product, and also that you as a customer success manager fundamentally understand the business challenge that your customer has, and then partner with them, right, to fulfill or to meet those challenges. So what all of these jobs have in common is that you're less sort of doing this sort of routine automated work, but you are doing work that is fundamentally centered around understanding a person, which requires communication, empathy, interpersonal skills, and we are all seeing that some of the biggest skill gaps that we see on the platform are in terms of people management and oral communication and interpersonal collaboration. With the spread, the geographic spread of jobs across the world, particularly in the ICT, but not exclusively in the ICT sectors, we're also seeing a big increase in team collaboration skills. So it doesn't take one person to produce a product. That little piece needs to be sort of shipped around the world, either physically or digitally, and it needs to be collaborated across time, across distance, and across culture in order to pull all of those pieces together into a service or product. And so we are really seeing that the most, when people say they are looking for culture, what they're really saying is they're looking for people who can work in a team. A lot more of that work is becoming creativity and team-based. And then finally, I'll say that it should be no surprise to people here that a lot of the jobs, every job is becoming more digitally intensive. And so some of the most characteristic qualities of jobs are becoming more human-centric, but that is because they are underpinned by a lot of data automation and insights automation that is becoming a normal, regular, sort of table stakes part of the job that you need to know in order to be able to focus on all of that human-centric work.
Great. Jaime, so you are in Las Vegas. You're much closer to the ground and actually making it work. How do you see, what are the key challenges, especially for youth, that you see in Las Vegas, and how is that changing with automation and digitalization?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think Vegas is not as removed from the reality the nation shares as people might think. By the way, there's a little poll in the back saying who would like to see this conference in Las Vegas next year. So make sure you take Ron. There you go, Ron. But we, as a matter of fact, I think one of the great things that's happening now, because last year the Bertelsmann Foundation came to Las Vegas and we had a really strategic convening of the ecosystem around the future of work and the impact. Just 2 weeks ago, we released our workforce blueprint for the area. And what that calls for is really a strong focus on aligning the supply side of the workforce, which is the K through 12 system, the public workforce development system, with the demand side, which is the businesses in Las Vegas, which are the ones that are telling us, we need this, we need that, or we're evolving. And so for us, the challenge is really making sure that we execute on that gap remediation. So this evolution that's happening, and that's the difficult part, because as you know, things don't evolve overnight. And so as that moving target switches, the K through 12 system and the public workforce development system, higher ed, everybody has to adjust with it. So we're in the middle of that right now in Las Vegas. If you want to know more about it, you can find it anywhere if you Google Nevada Workforce Blueprint 2.0.
Great. Laura, we can switch gears a little bit and see learn more about, what you are finding in your work in Latin America and, the main impacts of the future of work on skills and jobs in Latin America.
Thank you so much, and welcome to everybody who came from Latin America and the Caribbean today to be part of this conference. We have several people from different ministries in the region, so welcome all who are coming from the region. So for the future of work, what we are seeing in the region is that we're going to have the huge impact of two main trends. One is technological change, that is something that was discussed before, but also the demographic change. For many of the countries in Latin America and the Caribbean, it's going to take 2 decades only to go from 10% of people who is 65 and plus to go to 20%. And these two countries like UK, the United States, like 50 years. So it's only 2 decades compared to 50 years in more developed countries. This technological change and also the demographic change is going to have an impact on different aspects. From the demographic point of view, there's going to be an increase in the medical services demand, also in the care economy demand. And from a technological point of view, we have a recent Inter-American Development Bank study that analyzed the surveys, household surveys for 15 years for 9 countries, and combined it also with analysis from the LinkedIn data for 4 countries in the region. And from that analysis, you can see that the technological change is impacting the demand of skills. And it's impacting in the sense that most of the most demanded skills, from the 20 first ones in the list, 10 are digital, technological skills or digital skills. You can see that advanced technological skills or digital skills are the most demanded, but there is a decrease in the demand for basic digital skills. So the digital skills that are used in occupations like administrative support or clerical support are diminishing, but at the same time, other digital skills that are in the advanced categories are increasing. So the granularity that the LinkedIn data give us is very interesting to analyze, that we cannot talk only about digital skills in general, but we have to differentiate between advanced and basic digital skills. And also, we can see from that study, and actually one of the authors is in the second row here, Carmen Pajes, and some other authors are in the room. You can see that other categories of workers, like for example medical workers, are also increasing in demand. But not only doctors, but also nurses, kinesiologists, ophthalmologists, many categories of workers that are within the medical category. And this also supports the idea that the demographic change is already like showing the impacts on the demand of skills.
Great. Jeffrey, I'm sorry. We're going to go next to you. So at the foundation level, you're working more in spreading awareness about the future of work. What are the key findings from your work as it relates to automation and digitalization and sharing challenges about the future of work?
Thank you, Swati. So for those of you not familiar with the Bertelsmann Foundation, we're a nonprofit, nonpartisan think tank based here in Washington, D.C. Starting back in 2013 with the Frey and Osborne study, there were many, many international studies that were released on the future of work, the impact of technology and automation on jobs, tasks, workers, regions. And starting about 3 years ago, we realized that all of these studies have been put out, many of which say that technology and automation will ultimately decimate jobs. However, there were also studies that said that technology and automation would create a lot of jobs and new tasks. One of the problems that we identified at the foundation was that most of these were happening at the international or national level. However, workforce development and economic development here in the United States has already largely devolved to local areas, so that being at the state, county, and city level, as many of you already know. So starting about a year and a half ago, we launched a project at the foundation that was intended to be transatlantic in nature, and the core question that we wanted to answer is, so all of these studies have been done saying that you're going to lose millions of jobs, gain millions of jobs, but what does this actually mean for you as a local community? And perhaps more importantly, how can you as a local leader, whether that's a mayor or someone that's chair of the workforce board like Jaime, how can you go about developing policies and a strategy around the future of work? And so we launched a project in partnership with Ron Painter at the National Association of Workforce Boards, in which we did convenings across the United States and the European Union. So we took a look at 3 case studies in the United States, Orlando, Florida, Riverside, California, which is actually my hometown, and the city of Las Vegas. And so I would say that one of the key takeaways that I have from the project here in the United States is that, and this is based on stakeholder engagement in each place, it was a qualitative study that we did, is that local policymakers are incredibly concerned about the impact of technology and automation on their local labor markets. But at the same time, they see these studies coming out that are being cited in the press about doomsday or overly optimistic scenarios. And I think that there are a lot of issues in how you actually take that and develop a concrete strategy at the local level. So one of the key takeaways that I have, and I believe that Jaime in Las Vegas can speak more to this, is that the workforce board, local workforce boards, really need to be the catalyst in creating a community conversation that includes not just the workforce board, but representatives of organized labor, core anchor employers, workers themselves, and then the political leadership as well. So the future of work is something that is inherently political. If policymakers in local areas are not responding in a good way, then they're really going to be stuck holding the bag at the end of the day for any disruption that might be caused by technology and automation.
Jaime, do you want to expand on that? Just, what is happening in what you guys are doing in Las Vegas on what Jeffrey was saying?
Sure. I think the biggest takeaway for us after the initial conversation almost a year ago now was just what he expressed, the commitment that we made at that time as a local workforce development board to really be the convener around this conversation. And so the conversation is on the front page of our daily work. We're engaging not just with our local municipalities, multiple cities, counties, but also now at the state level. And so Southern Nevada drives almost 85% of the economy in Nevada, and so as Southern Nevada goes, usually goes Nevada's economy. So I think that's the important key takeaway. We have conversations going at multiple levels in education, workforce development, economic development, to really make sure we're as prepared as possible for this evolution when we talk about the future of work.
Okay. Laura, I wonder if you can expand on, what does that mean, or what you see from your work in Latin America? What does that do for inequality in the labor market? Because, there are those that, you talked about the basic digital skills and the advanced digital skills, and even with the demographic changes, how people are able to adapt to that. What does that mean for inequality in the labor market?
Yes, actually, I think Karen mentioned that in the previous panel. One of the fears that we have, especially for the future, because technology is changing very fast in the United States and other countries, but it's coming at a slower pace of adoption in Latin America and the Caribbean. But because what we are seeing, we have like the window of what's happening in the United States and other countries in terms of labor polarization and increasing inequality, and we are seeing that we have to act really fast to not have the impact of this type of impacts that are negative in terms of inequality and polarization. We're starting to see, actually, we have a recent study also that mentions at the IDB that in Latin America and the Caribbean, we're starting to see the polarization, labor market polarization. So our fear is that in the future it's going to be more pronounced, and in terms of the low-skill population, because the demand of skills is going to be on the advanced digital skills, knowing languages to be connected to the gig economy, other skills that are going to be most demanded, but this may hit more the lowest skill, and then we're going to have an increase in inequality in the region that is the most unequal region of the world. So I think this has to be a big signal that we need fast to put it in place policies to prevent the negative consequences of the technological change.
Okay. Jeffrey, do you want to talk about just sort of what differences you see between United States and Europe and how local communities are addressing that, whether it's polarization or other challenges?
Sure. So in the work that we've done in the United States, one of the things that I've been surprised by in the convenings that we've done is we've actually asked a core question across all three of the groups, Orlando, Riverside, and Las Vegas, is at the end of the day, who do you think should be responsible for the strategy development process in your local community around the future of work? Who should be leading the conversation? Who should be convening? And then second of all, who do you think should be responsible for funding any policies that come from the strategy? And so in a place like Las Vegas, I was surprised to hear many people say, I think that this is personal responsibility. This is something that individuals are going to need to be responsible for. And the same was repeated across Orlando and Riverside. When you go to Europe and in some of the convenings that we've done in Italy and Germany, I think that stakeholders there see much more of a role for the state in driving policy around the future of work. And this is something that's been done in Germany, where you see the Ministry of Labor and Social Affairs has released white papers on the future of work, green papers on the future of work, and then they've actually done really, really intensive stakeholder engagement across Germany to see what labor unions, workers, enterprises want out of an inclusive future of work strategy. And so one of the key takeaways that I've seen between Europe and the United States is the role of personal responsibility in crafting future of work strategy.
That is really interesting. And in the U.S., we've seen that there used to be much more investment from the businesses in terms of on-the-job training that has sort of shifted away. And so it's interesting that, in neither of those situations did you see that a larger role that businesses play in training and educating their workers, whether it's through apprenticeships or on-the-job training or other mechanisms. So it's either the state or personal responsibility, but not the businesses that have the most to gain from a skilled labor.
And I think that's one of the big policy puzzles is in some of the areas that we worked, one of the reasons we went to places like Riverside, Orlando, and Las Vegas is that they have large dominant employers in those communities, and people are drawn to these communities because there are lots of low skill, low wage opportunities in many cases. You can go to one of these places and get a job almost immediately. They're some of the fastest growing places in the United States, and so one of the key questions that I came away with is how can we ensure that businesses in these local communities are taking responsibility for retraining, reskilling, lifelong learning?
Yeah, thank you. Liz, do you want to, just switching gears a little bit again, talk about skill gaps? And what that, if to the extent that you can, talk about the role of communities and businesses in addressing those skill gaps.
Yeah, thanks. So I think the first thing that I would say is that most skill gaps are highly localized, right? Employers, there are certain sort of regional or community-related industries or employers that have very specific skill needs. So for instance, right, even in a city as big as New York, right, the financial sector is looking for a combination of technological skills who understand banking regulations and the privacy and the regulatory concerns there, who can also, right, figure out how to expand those services at scale, right? So that is like a very specific bundle and niche of skills that is highly specialized to the banking sector in New York. I will use New York, but it's actually true, right, if you think about automotive manufacturing in Tennessee, right, you need people with very specific technical skills and digital skills who can also coordinate. And so I think that one of the key first things that we need to do to think about, so we do see sort of national level skill gaps, which are sort of broadly a reaction to the fact that jobs overall are changing, and there are sort of core digital and core personal skills, right, that are just becoming more prevalent across all jobs. Just teaching people how to be empathetic, right, or to collaborate well is going to make them better workers, but may not make them suitable workers for local employment conditions, because all jobs combine, right, sort of contextually specific tasks and skills and knowledge with those sort of baseline competencies. So the first way to think through a local skills gap is, I think, to Jeffrey's point, that you need to think about the local needs, right, of employers and of industries. LinkedIn has been working very hard to try and leverage the granularity that we have in the data to really provide cities, medium-sized, particularly cities and states across the country and across the world, with real-time analysis of what skills are becoming much more important and how are those skills being combined so that workforce boards, community colleges, mayors can sort of come together and put together training and modules that will actually help prepare workers for specific jobs in their local communities. I think that's sort of first and foremost, which means that there just needs to be more data and more real-time analysis of what those skill needs are, and then, right, wraparound services and clear pathways to rapid insertion, right, to gain those skills, and then to signal those competencies. I'll make a quick side point, but I don't think that it's not germane to this conversation, that we talk a lot about moving from a degree-based to a competency-based economy, and one of the largest challenges to doing that is going to be figuring out how to develop credible signals of competency that employers can take to the bank in the same way that they have been taking college degrees as credible signals of competency and skill for the last 250 years. We are no longer in that space, but if we want to facilitate cyclical labor market retraining, relearning, and rapid insertion, we need to crack that nut. And that is likely to have a number that is going to look very differently depending on circumstances. but so identifying the challenges and then really facilitating the pipeline to like that sort of rapid competency-based learning to develop those, giving people credible skill signals, which by the way will also have the benefit of incentivizing people properly to develop those competencies because they know that they can realize those gains in the labor market. And then in our experience, it really takes a consortium. It takes community college curriculum designers. It takes workforce boards. It takes dedicated Department of Labor mayoral staff to really come together and make all of those things happen because there are so many pieces. And as students and learners become much more diverse, both in age, demographics, cultural backgrounds, they really need a lot more support, wraparound services, and different learning modalities. So I think anyway, to sort of sum up, I mean, we do see these sort of large national level skill gaps, but really sort of cracking that nut is going to be a highly localized partnership between business, educational institutions, and government altogether.
Swati, may I add to that?
Absolutely.
So I want to thank you for bringing that up and ask you if you used that word or those three words, credible, skilled, signals. Have you patented that, or did you make that up?
No, that's free and open
that's
use.
really good.
You're welcome to it.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm gonna use it. And the reason why is because for all the reasons you said, and again, because we as a community now are purposely working on that SCAP remediation, one of the things that we did was we started an initiative, or we wanted to become an ATT Work Ready community, certified by ACT. Everybody knows who ACT is, right? The college readiness exam. But like you said, 70% of our high school graduates are not going to that four-year pathway. A lot of them are going into the workforce. So in the K through 12 system now, we're assessing them for work readiness through the Work Keys assessment. And they're able to earn a National Career Readiness Certificate in either bronze, silver, gold, or platinum. And so when you have enough employers and enough certificates produced, then you can become you kind of, again, signal to them community that you've aligned education, workforce development to the employer's needs. So about 3 months ago, I think, Clark County, which holds Las Vegas, North Las Vegas, we became the largest county in the nation to be certified as a work-ready community. So those are some of the results, again, of the purposeful focus that we have.
Laura, do you want to talk about lifelong learning opportunities that you see across, Latin America and the U.S.?
Well, that is one of the main challenges in our region. We are going to have a huge need for upskilling, reskilling, and basic skilling of our population. And the education and training systems are not as flexible as they should be to have a lifelong learning approach, to understand what the demand of the labor market is in a timely manner and respond to that demand. So there is a long way to go to have strong education and training systems that are responsive to the demand and demand-oriented in general. What we are doing at the Inter-American Development Bank is supporting some countries in the region to have a sector-based approach. So that's important for us because you have sector-specific skills that are demanded. When you concentrate in certain sectors, you have a much better conversation with the employers' associations and the employers themselves, so you can construct the type of training that the firms really need. And we are doing this in countries like Trinidad and Tobago, in the Bahamas, in Jamaica, in Panama. And also working at the local level, it was also important for us. For example, in the case of Panama, we have a loan in execution that is supporting the government to have a competitive training fund. That is basically the government having a certain amount of money in a fund that so the firms can present proposals for training on the job. And so the public sector is subsidizing part of the training that the firm does, but also there is co-financing from the private sector. So it's a very interesting model. And this is at the local level on the western part of the country in three particular sectors. It's the agribusiness, logistics, and tourism. So I think the sector-based combined with competitive training funds is a good strategy that we are supporting in the countries, because what we really want to do is to move from a supply-oriented training system to a demand-oriented training system where the employees are really in the driver's seat.
Okay.
I just want to make one final point about credible skill signals. Is that I think it's actually really quite amazing, and I think the audience will appreciate that. The development of employer-based skills and competencies and training programs, I think, is a really warm and welcome reaction to the need, right? I think we've really seen employers stepping up and people stepping up. I will say that there is an inherent tension, and I think people who are doing workforce development and policy making should really think carefully about the tension between short-term, highly specialized training for immediate labor market insertion to get somebody a job as fast as possible, which should in fact respond to very specific employer needs, and what we are seeing over and over and over again, which is that generic, generalized additional education is a long-term investment in human capital that also makes workers more resilient and would result in a credential that actually is not merely applicable to one employer, but to many employers. So the risk of doing employer-based certification is that that certification is only good, right, for one or a couple of employers, which may actually reduce worker mobility and resilience in the long term. So I just want to highlight that tension and trade-off because it is a very real one that I think people are grappling with as we're all sort of figuring out how to develop those skill signals for workers in the future.
Thank you. I do want to invite audience to ask any questions if they have. We have about 20 minutes at this point. If there are any questions, please go ahead.
Yes, I'm Fernando from Brazil. I have a question. You were saying about local needs.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Fernando. I'm from Brazil. I have a couple questions. The first one is, you were telling us about local needs, but your example was about New York. So I don't think that you have to concern about big cities because I think migration will supply the demand. I'm more concerned about medium and small cities where people are not willing to go or they have difficulty. And I see this a really a question about asymmetric information. So I believe that the first thing that we have to do is to spread out information about job needs and job qualification. And the second question is about specific training. I totally agree with you that you have to give a resilient labor force, you have to give a broad training. And in my opinion, we need to teach people how to learn by themselves over time. So it's not only about professional training, it must start in the beginning of the schooling of the young kids. We have to teach them how to learn by themselves because this will give them the opportunity to be able to adapt themselves in a labor future that no one here knows where they're coming from, where they're going from. We know where we are now, but we don't know the path ahead. So the question is, how do we train people to be able to learn what we do not know that they will have to learn in the future? So this is a tough question. We talk about soft skills training that will allow people to be able to be resilient in the labor market. But do you guys have an idea of the kind of training are you talking about? Do you have an experience that worked? You talk about certification? I know that Portugal did a huge certification program to be able to give credible information, but do you know the results of this kind of procedures? How do they increase employment probabilities over time? Do you guys have any thoughts about that? Thank you very much.
I'll go first.
Okay.
So just because I guess I went and blobbed that we're a certified community. But for the certificate that I was talking about earlier, the National Career Readiness Certificate, that measures what they call foundational workplace skills, right? Cognitive thinking, critical thinking, problem solving. And then again, it's kind of employer agnostic because those skills, you use them everywhere, in the kitchen, in the office, in the manufacturing plant. So we have great results with that because it's increased employability of our participants because employers, again, are finding that when they're hiring somebody with those recognizable, what was the word again?
Credible skill signals?
Credible skill signals. Now they believe when they hire people with that credible skill signal, they don't have to, it's the right person with the right skills at the right level. And so they're saving, employers are telling us that they're avoiding a lot of cost in rehiring, retraining, and so that's been success for us there. What we don't have yet is the next level, what you're talking about. There's other components to these assessments that are deeper into that soft skills you were talking about, empathy, those other things. And so we're about to open the door there, but because it's needed, and it's true for all the reasons we heard, but we don't have data on that yet. We do have data on the other one, though, and it's looking really good, which is why the reason we're going to go a little deeper into what you were talking about earlier.
Do either of you want to tackle rural or medium-sized communities?
Yeah, so to the first question, that's really important. I mean, so we can also do the same, we can produce the same analysis for Akron, Ohio, as we can for Indianapolis. So in fact, LinkedIn coverage is good enough to cover the vast majority of second tier, smaller and medium-sized American cities. That obviously, as our data gets better and better over time, right, most people in Brazil, right, who are on LinkedIn are in Sao Paulo or Rio, right? And so I will say from a LinkedIn perspective, as our data is limited to the people that are on our site, and far and away, the most people on our site are in large and medium-sized cities. Which is also, by the way, I think urbanization is not sort of a passing trend. Urbanization is very likely to increase over time, and over time, the needs of rural communities will become more specialized, but they will also become much less important relative to the employment needs of people in medium and large-sized cities, which does not actually get to your question of how do we measure the needs of rural communities. But I think we're still trying to figure out how do we actually just get real-time granular labor market information for anybody, and LinkedIn is obviously contributing in part to that solution. But I'm not really sure that I know the answer of how to do that for a city of 10,000 people or less, for instance.
For example, in the case of Panama that was mentioned, in the cities that are in the western part of Panama, that Chiriquí, Bocas del Toro, they are really small cities, medium-sized cities. But the strength of that project was in the business associations that were placed in that part of the country, and they actually were the champions of the project, that they were connected with the national government to express their needs and say, we really need this in the communities. So the sector skills councils that are going to be groups of employers analyzing the demands of these specific three sectors are going to be the groups that are going to gather the information for these small and medium cities in this part of the country to analyze what are the needs and how to express them to the training centers what they need to be trained for.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
So the problem that you're alluding to is the build it and they will come problem with New York City. So I've actually worked with New York City on some of their future of work strategy. And I would say, so if you want to get small and medium-sized cities involved in thinking about the future of work creatively, I really think that it's going to be the role of states and counties to build place-specific strategies around the future of work. And one of the big outstanding questions that remains is how do you get people at all levels of the labor market, and students as well, to learn how to learn. And I don't think that we've figured that out. I can speak to one of the case studies that we worked on, Orlando. So Orlando is booming, and growth is being driven by two populations. One population is very, very young, coming from Latin America, obviously speaks Portuguese, speaks Spanish. And the other group that's driving growth in Orlando is a retired population that is coming from northern states in many ways. And so one of the opportunities that we identified in a place like Orlando was to actually create some sort of connection in terms of like lifelong learning between retired workers that are at the end of their career or are retired, and these new arrivals that are all flocking to Orlando for the same reasons. But it's really going to be up to the local community to operationalize that and to actually make it happen. These people live in vastly different parts of the region, and it will not happen on its own.
And I'll just add to that, at IEDC, we did a study last year called Future Ready. And while we focus mostly on economic development organizations, and a vast majority of our membership is actually rural communities, it was shocking how few communities are thinking about future in general, whether it's future of work, whether it's climate change, whether it's technology. And it is really really shocking that, especially when it comes to small and rural communities, they don't have it on the radar, and they are working on, putting out the fire that is burning today, rather than being able to find the resources and the political will, and get all the stakeholders together to think about the future and start planning for it so that they are in a better place. So it is a real challenge that you're talking about. And I mean, we don't have the answer to it yet, but it is at least a realization that that is a gap, and it is a real challenge that needs to be addressed. But we have a question there. Yes. I think if you can hold for a second, they'll bring the mic. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Again, Mike Bartlett, National Governors Association. Thank you all so much for your remarks. I think the idea and the concept of lifelong learning is certainly not something that's new in the discourse here, but you all rightly pointed out that economic development and workforce development are local activities. It's about a relationship between an employer and one worker and intermediaries and so on. In our work, we've often observed that there are many communities that are able to figure out how to do this and create successful partnerships like you were outlining in Las Vegas, but it's very hit or miss across the country. For every high-quality partnership in a local community, there are many communities where it just doesn't come together. How can public policy, either at the federal or the state level, build capacity in local communities and knowledge and know-how and skills on how to do that kind of intermediation and really think about the future and reorienting of their communities? How do we build that infrastructure and that knowledge base? Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow, that Ron Painter should have been on this panel. Where's Ron Painter? He left. Or Virginia should have been on this panel. But I would say, I think, obviously the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act was, and its predecessors are an attempt to do that, to establish a locally driven, workforce development strategy that works along with economic development, but within also the reality of a state. Right, and again, in Nevada, I know we're very unique because we have 2 workforce boards and 2 different economies, and I gave you the ratio earlier, but I know there's other states that are very different than us, and so I guess for me, I know that reauthorization is coming up soon for WIOA. I think, I hope that there continues to be a strong local focus like there has been now, and continue to strengthen that local infrastructure.
Go ahead,
for the record, we've not tested it yet, but we're doing a fair amount of work on networks and connections and the role of facilitating professional connections across people as a conduit for tacit and implicit knowledge, right? So much of the best practices work that comes out in any area, workforce development included, is sort of best practice based, which actually isn't really specific enough to be very tactical or actionable. And I would actually put it out to the group that one of the ways that we are thinking about, right, how do we disseminate the tacit, the inexplicable knowledge, right, that people have, I mean, I just sort of thinking out of the box. I mean, I think experimentation with like rotating fellowships of city and local and workforce development board governments that have actually implemented these changes, not just to come and give a talk, but to actually like roll up their sleeves with communities and organizations that really want to replicate the success in certain areas, and to fund, right, the facilitation and the dissemination of tacit like the knowledge that you can't write down in an instruction booklet, to really just sort of help people work through. I'm a former economist, and Esther Duflo, who just recently won the Nobel Prize in economics, gave this really great speech at the AEA a few years ago, where she said we all need to think a little less like white collar people and a little more like plumbers, which is that we need to roll up our sleeves and tinker around and use the tools that are at our disposal, and really sort of teach everybody else at the same time how to do it. And I think that is like a very thought of way to transmit the actual applied knowledge about how to implement change on the ground, and I would encourage people to think about ways to do that.
Okay. We have one question in the back there. Okay, go ahead. So we'll come back to you just one second.
Buenos días, Daniel Sánchez, viceministro de Empleo de Paraguay. Vengo escuchando, nosotros tenemos una economía bastante controlada. Así también tenemos muchas necesidades en torno a las bases de datos que tiene el país, pero sí me hace mucho ruido, por lo general, de que el Banco Interamericano de Desarrollo nos pone un futuro y nos muestra cómo va a ser el futuro del trabajo. Y estoy escuchando la necesidad de certificaciones y demás. Pero sí tengo una preocupación, que es la expectativa que se crea en la persona desocupada y cuánto la empresa desea abonar por esa vacancia, por ese salario. ¿Cómo hacen las economías ya desarrolladas para negociar entre la expectativa del desocupado y cuánto desea abonar la empresa? Thank you.
Okay, so I'll translate that for the group. So he's coming from Paraguay, saying that he's hearing they're in a controlled economy, and he's hearing a lot about the future of work and being told what that is, what that looks like. But what concerns him is the expectations that's within the employers, the ones who are unemployed, of what that looks like to be trained, and how private firms are actually contributing to be able to help develop them. So how is it that you guys have seen that firms are contributing, and how are we setting those expectations of that contribution for the, I guess, joint training of the unemployed?
Well, you asked actually from the advanced economy side, but we have the experience on the training through apprenticeships that were mentioned also in the first panel, where actually the employers and the government co-finance the apprenticeship on the firm. So the unemployed in this case has this possibility of being in a firm most of the time, like 80% of the time is actually the type of apprenticeship that works, and 20% in a training center or some time of training outside of the firm. But this co-financing mechanism for the firm is an incentive that the government subsidizes part of the training. That is basically to incentive the firm to make the training on the most basic skills, the socio-emotional skills and the general skills. And then the financing from on the part of the firm would be like to finance the technical skills, right, that are specific to the firm. So this type of training programs work for many countries outside of the Latin American and Caribbean region. We think that there are very good impacts in terms of the youth or the unemployed in general, because some countries have more than youth as a target group. And also for the firms, they have productivity gains from the apprenticeships. So that's one way to do it. The competitive training funds that I was mentioning before is a more open model. You can have a target group that is broader than youth. You can have a training that is specific for the type of firm that is applying through the proposal to the fund. And I think it's an interesting model to explore if you are not interested in doing a type of apprenticeship or dual program. But I think there are models out there that are promising for countries like Paraguay. So we can talk more later if you like.
Okay. The gentleman in the back. Yep.
Hi. My name is Kristen Work. I'm from Chile. I am the director of the government website for work, Bolsa Nacional de Empleo. And I've been listening to the different opinions, and they talk about digital skills, competencies, and soft skills. And I would like to know if you have like best practices or ideas on how to see the digital side from the agencies. I've heard a lot about going from an institution-based society to a platform-based society. So I think that we have to work in developing platforms or solutions from the digital perspective to help people to be more digital prepared. So what are we doing on our side to develop digital tools to help the people to do what they need to do in the future? So if you have experience to share in that area, that would be interesting.
Well, I'm not sure if this is exactly what they are expecting from an answer, but actually, for example, in terms of supporting the transitions that are going to be more frequent in the future between jobs and between education and jobs, the government of Paraguay actually implemented an artificial intelligence-based intermediation platform. So instead of having only the presential or the face-to-face services, the intermediation service in Paraguay is also using artificial intelligence to match employers with unemployed individuals. And in general, the social sector of our bank, the Inter-American Development Bank, is looking at solutions in the digital through digital services to improve lives of the citizens in different aspects. In our case, in the labor markets division, is trying to see which type of tools can serve well the government and the citizens, like through intermediation services. We are also learning, investigating and trying to understand better how to improve learning through digital tools. And we had actually recently a big event to understand better how we can promote that. But we are trying to see which tools can serve well to the services of the social sector, and specifically the labor market services. So this is one example that maybe the Ministry of Paraguay can tell us a little bit more later.
Okay. Maybe we have.
I just have one comment.
Sorry.
I know that él debe ser el viceministro más joven del planeta. Right? The youngest vice minister in the planet. You must be, so.
There's one more burning question. We'll take that, but we are at exactly noon, and I don't want to stand in between you and lunch.
My name is Nachiket, and I represent an education technology company from New York called LearningMate. For the last couple of hours, we've had some very interesting discussions, and I was wondering if there's anyone in the audience from a university or a higher ed institution, because maybe this is a question on their behalf. We are hearing constantly that lifelong learning is the new university product, and that even higher ed institutions are going through an existential crisis of what they should be doing. So if you could throw some light on how do you see a role of a university or a college changing to address some of these challenges that we have been talking about. And my second question is, are there any technology solutions you think which could be relevant to address areas like employability, skill gap identification, skilling? Is there something like a national skills competencies index that everyone can refer to? What is it that will, help solve some of these problems in the short term and long term?
So that's another great question. I think, again, I can only speak what's happening in Las Vegas. And our community colleges and our universities, the higher education system, is trying to, again, adjust to the fact that not only today, but in the future, most of the jobs won't require that 4-year degree. And so we have a tremendous infrastructure, I know in Las Vegas, for higher education. But the shift right now is how does that infrastructure, again, help close the gap on everything that's being talked about today. We know what's coming is a moving target, as was eloquently articulated by the gentleman from Brazil. It's a moving target, so it's not like you can solve the equation with one stroke. But I know for us in Las Vegas, that's where we're at. We're trying to say, how does that infrastructure of higher education help us mediate that gap that we've recognized right now?
Go ahead.
Sorry. No, you go.
I'm so glad that you saved the simplest question for last. That really makes things easier. I think I would actually push back a little bit because, especially in large economies like the United States, one of the great strengths of the United States economy is that it is so diverse and broad, and that and the educational institutions as well are so multifaceted and different that it is very possible to incorporate a lot of needs from the private sector, from people demanding education, to actually fill those gaps. The American university and higher education system is incredibly resilient and agile relative to most other global systems. So I'm not entirely sure that like some sort of national skills index would actually benefit as much as it would just sort of add another signal that maybe people locally don't think is all that useful. Definitely LinkedIn is working hard. So for instance, we're developing like what we call a skills match index, which effectively sort of takes the skills that college graduates have on their profile from a specific major and will actually align it and create a distance measure between those skills and the skills that are characteristic of the industries and jobs to which those students apply, to help colleges and universities get some estimate or sense of how prepared, right, their graduates are for the industries that they're interested in working in. LinkedIn is not the only company that is trying to overcome and help to think of those measures of graduate preparedness for labor market insertion. I think that I can actually use my own mother as an example here, because she's a math professor at the Austin Community College for the last 15 years, and she and I talk a lot actually about the future of work, because everybody is worried that AI and automation are going to make educators obsolete, and she says, I'm not worried about that at all. She says that how her job has changed as an educator is from being a content provider, because there's lots of content now, right? She needs to know the math, but she doesn't need to know the math. To being a learning assistant, right? And so her job is to actually act as the bridge between the content and the learner's needs. Her job is much more about understanding how somebody is learning and what their barriers are, and to connecting them to the right content and learning. And I think that universities and other higher education institutions are really going to have to pivot to that bridge, right? So that there's no shortage of content, but there is a shortage of that sort of personalized assessment. And how do I get from, I don't understand this specific thing, to, right, this is the content that is going to speak to your needs and where you are. I will say that there is also very promising work in AI and in algorithm-based assisted education that it can actually help us do that at scale, right? We think about one-to-one personalized education as being something that is very expensive and can only benefit, right, the people with the greatest amount of resources. And actually, AI and automation has a real potential and power to help provide individualized and personal services mediated through a human being at scale for people who never could have conceived of that before. And I think we can be afraid of what automation is going to do to our jobs, but it's also not true that AI and automation and increasing digital capacities won't actually free us up from the most mundane, time-consuming parts of our jobs to actually help people achieve their goals.
Okay. Well, thank you all. Thank you, panelists, for being here and sharing your thoughts, and thank you all for participating.